Hey guys, for something here, just in case. um, so I did make it to the grocery store today. I don't know. I feel like I would have done better if I went yesterday, but I always try to give myself a pat on the back just for going and getting something. And it's very hard to not have Rex in mind. You're with someone for 9 years as your companion and you know what they would like, and when you see something and you think of them, and um it's hard. But anyway, I did that, and that was sort of exhausting. Last night somebody wanted to buy, you guys know I try to sell makeup on the side to help pay my bills. And I haven't been supremely successful, but I have make a uh effort. And I made all these lots and they haven't really sold. And all of a sudden last night, someone wanted to buy 17 of these little lots that they go for like $5 to $8. So to me, I was like, oh, that would be just so wonderful. And they asked, do you combine shipping? I was like, yes, but because it's on eBay, um, I have to sort of do it a different way if they want to save with shipping. Anyway, it didn't really work out. When I got back from the store, they wanted less. Maybe I took too long. And even now, they may end up canceling because it'll take too long. If I can't get it together by the end of the night, and I'm gonna try. So this stress, I feel I have this imposter syndrome with everything. Like, and oh, why did I think I could do business? Look at me. Or like, and people always criticize me with my YouTube or my OnlyFans or whatever, and it feels sort of um overwhelming in my head. So I actually have a tendency to go under the blankets and hide. Literally under the blankets, I got feel of air, hide. Sometimes I'll even just like shut the door, even though it's just us. And often I'll be so stressed, I'll fall asleep. And that's what happened. So woke up, put some makeup on. I bought a lot of fruit in like contain. I think that for Memorial Day they sort of made platters, but the ones that weren't really wanted and were getting kind of old, I was able to buy some of those at a discount. So I had a bunch of fruits, and I bought a chicken for $6. One of those like ready-made chickens, and I shared that with Fila for lunch. So had some food, that's good. Made a coffee and looking forward to reading to you. The chapter is called Summer of Slaughter. We begin at today. But I didn't know if I could write slaughter in the title, so it's a Summer of S, but that's what it stands for. So okay, so me and my carrots are going to turn a quick. How was your day this Thursday? Almost, almost Friday, almost the weekend. I don't even know where I put my phone. That's my eBay phone too, but it doesn't really matter since I only need this one right now. Because you have my soul attention, my lives. If you remember where we were at yesterday, it's the Civil War. Things are things are going down. I did get some more coffee pots. So the one I have right now, I think, is a Green Mountain brand. I think it's vanilla caramel. It's quite good. If you enjoy flavored coffees, and I put a little of that protein shake in there from Daryl. Okay. Oh, thank you, Marcus. That was very sweet. All right. Settle down, class. Begin to read. By late May of 1862, the Irish Brigade was close enough to Richmond to hear the groans of a city preparing for siege. The sound of church bells appealing to God and of cannons clearing their throats of shot and shell had a desperate ring. The Confederacy was in a panic. Born amidst boasts of liberty, it now suspended the writ of habeas corpus and put Norfolk. Can you guys tell me what habeas corpus means? What does it mean? Yeah, it must be Latin, a translation in Latin for something literally. And put Norfolk, Portsmouth, and Richmond under martial law. The rebel government enacted the continent's first military draft, ordering all men from 18 to 35 to join the fight against the United States. Yeah, the Confederacy drafted people as well. You'll better fight. On a whisper or an anonymous note, people were thrown in jail for suspicion of Union sympathy. Shops closed, barricades encircled the city, women and children were sent away. The rebel nation's gold was packed for shipment. Prices spiked. Hoarding put sugar and butter out of reach for all but the well connected. The sale and production of alcohol was outlawed. To further the misery, torrents of rain fell throughout the spring, flooding streets and homes, sending rivers over their banks and washing away bridges. After the humiliation of Bull Run, the Union had run up a string of victories. General Ulysses S. Grant captured key forts in Tennessee, and Federal ships conquered New Orleans, the biggest city in the South, giving them free reign of much of the Mississippi. In Virginia, the Union had amassed 105,000 troops to attack the slaveholding capital against a much smaller force. Though neither side knew precisely what the other had, everything was in line for a knockout punch, but McClellan held back, setting up camp on the lawn of a house once owned by Martha Custis, wife of George Washington. In the endless wait during a spring of fickle sunshine, General Marr sought amusement for his boys and himself. He spent his days reading the Dublin Citizen, a month out of date, reciting the poems of martyred patriots, sharing whiskey with officers and infantrymen alike, all while Confederate cannons thundered in the near distance. Heavy guns are opening their jaws every 5 or so minutes, right in front of us, he wrote his brother in law, Sam Barlow. The Irish Brigade was doing nothing more dangerous than cleaning muskets, mending jackets and stockings, grumbling and drilling, and doing it all to the music of artillery. His men had steamed down the Potomac through Chesapeake Bay, landing at the Virginia Peninsula. For many in the brigade, it was the longest journey they had made over water since crossing the Atlantic in coffin ships. After laying siege to Yorktown, the Union Army moved up the big finger of land, closing in on Richmond. Laborers before they put on uniforms, accustomed to using their hands as claws and their backs as levers, the Irish were put to work cutting and stripping timber for the corduroy of spongy roads heading north. Fueled by black coffee 3 times a day, they had worked their way up the peninsula only to squat in the stew of wet earth within 6 miles of the Confederate capital. There they waited on McClellan, as did the president. I think the time is near when you must either attack Richmond or else give up the job and come to the defense of Washington, Lincoln told his general in chief. Scouts and Union balloons, new to war in the Americas, had gone up in the air a few days earlier, giving the army a peek at more than 50,000 rebel soldiers south and east of Richmond. But weeks more passed without orders. Clothes would not dry, and the much hated ankle high boots the soldiers wore, brogans from the Gaelic, seemed glued to webbed feet. The soles were flimsy, going barefoot was a better option for many. The food was wretched and moldy. Dysentery was common. You could stare at a mess plate, a tin cup, a haversack full of teeth dulling hardtack, and it stared back without mercy or enticement. Nor could you think about what was ahead more than a year into the war. It was clear that when armies clashed, losses were enormous. The shock of Shiloh in April, where at least 20,000 men were killed or wounded on both sides, was hard to fathom. The sight of piles of bodies, headless and legless, mangled in gore, would have cured anybody of war, one officer wrote. Shiloh, the surprise attack against Grant's soldiers on the Tennessee River, had produced a deadly marker. More people fell in that one battle than in all the wars in American history up to that point. Wow. But you know what? Like, the whole idea of like, okay, like this sucks in many ways, but like the camp life, the horrible food, the cold, the shoes. Like I would just because it reminds me of my childhood. And oh, thank you, Darth. Um, where you would turn it into a game. Have you ever done that where you have like a shitty situation and you turn surviving it into a game? So like this camp life, making it a dare and also like leaning into things. Like you can lean into happy things is was very fun. Allowing yourself to be happy over something like, oh, isn't this such nice weather? And you just say it over and over like you would if it was cold. Isn't this so cold? Isn't this so nice? Or what's his name? Dirt Nation, as you know. He sent me a clip of the movie. You ever seen What About Bob? Where Bob's eating and he's like, like I used to eat like that when I was a kid, and my sisters hated it. Like, stop, tell her to shut up. Like, I don't think my mom minded because it was her food. If I'm like, that's so good, but I was told doing that means like I'm just a very sensual person. But yeah, it's like anyway, leaning into like good feelings. But sometimes you can something that may seem like a negative, like even though like it is war and that sucks, but try to find something positive about it. Like you're in a game. You're turn it into some sort of um a experience more than just misery, and that will give you a tool to not only get through it but sometimes to thrive. Like you can find something like how do I say it? um I'm trying to think of an example that doesn't sound horrible. But you'll know when you're in it. Time was spent cleaning smoothbores, the muskets that had been used by European armies since the 17th century. The guns were heavy, 9 pounds without bayonet, hard to operate and inaccurate. When fired, a lead ball banged around the barrel and it exited in the general direction of a target, an effective range of 80 yards, if lucky. After repeated action, the barrel heated up and could not be reloaded without risking explosion in the face of a shooter. Mark preferred a shorter barrel packed with buck and ball, 30 caliber pellets and a 69 caliber lead ball, which would spray out like the blast of a shotgun. This and fixed bayonets. He left no doubt of the implication. The brigade intended to fight up close in the faces of the enemy. As a nod to the Irish love of horse racing, he decided to stage a steeplechase at Tyler's farm, their Virginia encampment. At the same time, he organized matches of Gaelic football, the ancient game once outlawed by the penal laws. The soldiers cut an oval in the wet grass and picked jockeys to ride their fastest horses. Uniforms were made of Tablecloths, bets were placed, purses offered, elemental grandstands were constructed. Top brass, Generals Israel B. Richardson and William French among them, arrived and took their seats. Marr, as maestro with toasts and stories, egging on rivalries, was in high spirits. He loved a laugh. He was overflowing with wit and humor of the raciest kind, one officer wrote. If only Michael Corcoran could share the afternoon. Marr's fellow exile was wasting away in a Confederate prison, ill with typhoid fever. One day a fire had broken out, filling the jail compound with smoke. Oh my God. Did I tell you the other night I lit tea on fire? I'm like, Terry, you're going to be like, what the fuck? So I had two cups. One of them I filled with water. The other one I put a couple of tea bags. So I put the one with the tea bags and no water. They were supposed to be combined, of course, into the microwave for like 3 minutes. And I'm like, what does that smell? I look over and you can like see inside the microwave somewhat, even though there's some sort of film, but it was literally the cup and fire shooting out like a torch. Like, oh my God. And it wasn't because there was any metal on the cup. And there was an interesting cup too, because it was weird Romanians. It was like I got it at the thrift. So imagine just like weird, like random, like nobody Romanians took a picture of themselves in Romanian getup with some Romanian words and had it kind of cafe press put on a mug. And I bought that mug for $1. But it lit on fire so bad I had to throw it away. Anyway. Per Britannica Encyclopedia. Is a writ requiring a person under arrest to be brought before a judge or into court. Oh, so essentially, well, I don't actually know what that implies. That if you're arrested, there's not as many limits on what can be done to you when you're under arrest. That sucks. Okay, where was I? Oh, yes, a fire broke out, filling the jail compound with smoke. Corcoran, on his back, ordered an escape. Bedding tied together as a rope to flee, guards caught the brigade prisoners just as they landed on the ground. Though he missed Corcoran, Marr was boosted by the presence of another friend and veteran of young Ireland's fruitless struggle, John J. Kavanagh. That he had lived to fight again, or lived at all, was a small miracle, for Kavanagh had been the one shot in the thigh during the sad battle of Widow McCormick's cabbage patch of 1848. He bled profusely in the Tipperary garden. Smith O'Brien feared he would die then and there at the age of 20. But here he was, an officer in the Army of the Potomac by way of France and New York, watching Gaelic football with a fellow exile. To music from the brigade's pipe and drum corks, the races got underway. The steeplechase was just the fastest horse around a track blocked by hurdles, ditches, and a water hazard. Horses that did not clear the obstructions fell and tripped other riders. The brigade chaplain from Notre Dame had never seen such a spectacle. It was the invention of wild Irishmen, Father Corby observed, who did not know what fear is. A race of mules ridden by drummer boys followed, winner getting $30. In another part of the grounds, Thespian soldiers rehearsed lines for a play, then distributed hastily scrawled flyers for the evening's entertainment, sport, and theater, the Irish way of war. In a moment's time, the merriment came to a halt. From leaden skies, a series of booms rattled the grandstands. This was close. In a bold move, the Confederacy had decided to rip a tear in the Union Army, which was on either side of Chickahominy River, flowing 87 miles from north of Richmond to the James River. The Chickahominy was usually little more than a creek without a plan, but the spring rains had engorged the river into a python of brown water. In parts, it was a mile wide. The water divided McClellan's men, Marr in a large group on the north side of the river, and about 34,000 soldiers on the other side. The rebels attacked the southern wing on that Saturday, May 31st. Their plan was to save Richmond by destroying the smaller half of McClellan's army. 30 minutes after the last Chickahominy steeple race, Marr had his men marching toward the river to cross and reinforce the battered Union flank. They took no blankets, tents, or overcoats. It was a cold and gloomy afternoon, he wrote. The tremendous rain of the previous night had flooded the low grounds on both sides of the river to such a volume that only one bridge was found available for passage of the troops. Stragglers from the day's battle passed through them with grim news of bodies strewn just ahead. That one bridge meant to be the conveyance to the other side was tattered and sagging. While attempting to cross, men and mounts plunged into the river. Fording was the only reliable way, but then horses were sucked into the muck and the advance came to a dead halt. Soldiers who tried to move them sank up to their bellies. All the pushing and pulling could not get the big guns across the river. The artillery and men to guard it would have to stay on one side of the Chickahominy. Most of Mars' men waded through the floodplain, snakes all around them, toward the sound of the guns just before midnight in shin-deep mud, littered with the dead and the near dead. Mars' men came to a halt. The stench was awful, an open graveyard. See, this is why it's important to know the land, and you have such an advantage when you know the land that you're fighting in. This is one problem that we had in Vietnam. It's a totally different area that if you're from there, if you know the lands, you have much greater advantage. It's like jungle, that's why sometimes these guys said you could grow coffee there. The environment is much different than here, and you can put more booby traps. Mm. Where was- Not a star was visible. Marr wrote, one vast cloud filled the sky, producing so dense a darkness you would have thought it was through a coal pit in the bowels of the earth that we were marching here and there. You could catch the yellow glimmering or, at times, the broad and sudden flashes of the lanterns of the surgeons as they groped and stumbled over the field in search of the wounded. The saddest moans were heard on every side. A dull, heavy, woeful murmur deepened the tramp of the regiments passing through the darkness over the slain and dying. It was a good thing that the sky was so opaque, Marr wrote. The shock of going from gala games to a slurry of death was hard enough without having to see it all in its detail. They would try to get a few hours' sleep before the baptismal battle of the Irish unit. The horrors of the battlefield were buried in the depths of that impenetrable night. The wearied men of the brigade lay down to rest upon the drenched and torn ground, hardly conscious of the ghastly companions who slept among them, bathed in blood. They rose at 4 a.m. on Sunday, June 1st. The dawn broke sunless and gravel gray. Can you believe it's almost going to be June 1st and the year is half over? Mhm. How's the year going for you? Not super great for me, although last year wasn't either. I did lose my dog, but um, yeah, some good things I'm sure. Like, I don't have cancer that I know of. So that's good. Um, mhm. We saw the ghastly appearance of their bodies, which had been, as it were, our bedfellows. What had been a mud clump in front of Mar as he rested during the night now was revealed to be a Confederate soldier from a Georgia brigade. His long hair, matted and dirt encased, covered most of his face. White fingers clutched a broken musket. Mar noticed a large splotch on the stiff's uniform. Next to him was the body of a horse, eyes gouged, cemented in a claw of clayish blood. Ah, the last of the darkness gave way to more graphic gore. I feel like these are the kind of scenes that this is like PTSD that would like stay with you forever somewhere in your mind. Blankets and wet bundles wrapped around dead men with their eyes still open, mangled muskets, body parts, and horse heads. The ground itself moved, not an illusion. Mark came upon another Confederate, this one alive and dazed, leaning against a tree stump, his insides ripped, bleeding. In talking to him, Marr learned two things. The rebel was from South Carolina, and he was an Irishman. The soldier climbed a tree and shouted from a branch. He could see the church spires of Richmond. They were 4 miles from the capital of the Confederacy. Mar's query of the dying man was interrupted by a burst of musket fire from the woods just to one side. Another round came from the opposite direction. The battle that had begun the day before on the outskirts of Richmond between the Fair Oaks train station and the hamlet of Seven Pines was re-engaged. To their utter astonishment, the enemy found us within pistol range of them, Marrow. Nor were we less astonished at finding them without any intimation or warning whatever so close at hand. Before the Irish Brigade could assemble, a Union regiment went into the woods on the attack. Not long afterward, they scampered back minus half the force. Another Federal unit charged the woods. Marr could hear them, but not see them. In the midst of the back and forth attacks, General Edwin V. Sumner rode up to Marr, hatless and resolute, with an eagle's head of silver hair and a beard of the same tint. Bull Sumner, at 65, was the oldest field commander of any Union Army Corps. He fought against the Black Hawks and Mexicans and still retained a lust for organized bloodletting. To make his voice heard in advance of admonition, he removed his false teeth. His words for Mar were short: he must not fail. I want to see how Irishmen fight, Sumner told him. When you run, I'll run. Marr went up and down his line, cajoling, backslapping, reassuring, the orator's voice trim for war. They entered the fray on his command and quickly came under a hurricane of bullets. In Marr's words, there was nothing to do but scream louder and charge. With a Gaelic cry, the Irishmen ran toward incoming fire, unloading rounds into enemy bodies. Through mud and mire, through underbrush and down timber, Mar's men pressed against the rebels. The Irish brigade met them with fixed bayonets and a sweeping fire, hurling their lines before them, wrote Captain David P. Conyngham, who became an informal historian of the New York 69. They never moved backward. The wounded in gray were not picked up along the way, a sign that Confederate will had been broken. Other regiments missed the woods as well, flushing out the enemy. A small cabin was occupied by Union fighters and served as a cover. Balls clanked off the roof and walls, the sound of lethal hailstorm. Marr saw the Notre Dame priest with his black clerical garb and Mennonite beard running astride the Irishman, as much a part of the battle as the soldiers. The goal was a rail line near the river, leading directly to Richmond. By early afternoon, the Union owned the railroad. Other regiments reported a stalemate, but not the Irish. We got them on the run, a sergeant from one of the New York regiments said. Keep them running. Now the Irish dashed past the sloughed off weapons of the enemy, their wet coats and bedrolls. A soldier spotted a Confederate body, head and torso planted in mud, legs and feet sticking straight up, and made a mental note to return for the shoes of the corpse. The rebels ran as the Union men had run in molasses. Thousands of muskets were flung away, cartridge boxes, blankets, everything that ever so slightly checked or slacked the rapidity of that wild flight. Marr wrote, when the firing ceased, the Union Army was intact. About 35,000 soldiers of the South fell back to defend Richmond behind entrenchments of timber and earth. The Battle of Fair Oaks cost the Confederates 6,134 dead and wounded, to the Union's 5,031. More than that, it failed to break the Northern Army in two and left it at the doorstep of the rebel capital. Now was the time to push. The crux of the war was here. The city of Richmond was ours. Marr wrote. McClellan hinted at what was ahead. Soldiers of the Army of the Potomac, he said in an address issued a few days after the battle. You are now face to face with the rebels who are held at bay in front of their capital. The final and decisive battle is at hand. But Mack was full of doubt, content to have his army united, to have repelled the largest charge of the rebels in the eastern theater of the war. McClellan decided to go no farther for now. In Marr's official report, he reported the loss of 2 officers and 39 soldiers. McClellan personally complimented Marr for how the Irish had performed in battle and asked him about the peculiar battle cry of his men. In the storm of musket fire, the soldiers of the brigade did not run. Marr passed the compliment down to his mud-covered troops from the slums of eastern cities. The highest ranking general in the Union Army had proclaimed that the immigrants could fight. They already knew that. Privately, McClellan was seething. Though he outnumbered the enemy by almost 2 to 1, he feared that they had thousands more in reserve. And what he had witnessed, a 2-day battle taking more than 11,000 men, had weakened the young Napoleon's appetite for carnage. I'm tired of the sickening sight of the battlefield with its mangled corpses and poor suffering wounded. McClellan wrote his wife. Victory has no charms for me when purchased at such cost. On the other side, one casualty stood out, General Joseph E. Johnston, who led the Southern assault. Well, if y'all are so upset over the war, then why don't you just end the fucking slavery? Does it I mean, obviously there's extreme racism at play, but the fact I think that still to this day goes back to money. I think that people will find any way to justify war if there's money to be had for them, if there's financial incentive for them. Um, and these people on the ground are like, wow, this is a lot of debt. This is really bad. But someone somewhere's like, yeah, but I want my money. Oh, thank you, Jerry. Congratulations, Mike Smith. Mm. On the other side, one casualty stood out, General Joseph E. Johnston, who led the Southern assault. He was hit twice, fell from his horse, and was carried back to Richmond. The Confederate military would need new leadership. A day after the battle, as bone rattled rebels stumbled back behind the barricades of Richmond, as the papers feared the fall of a nation barely a year into its existence, President Davis named a new man to guide the South. He appointed Robert E. Lee, a gray bearded gentleman of 55, as commander of the renamed Army of Northern Virginia, and unlike McClellan, Lee preferred to attack. I think I have a biography of Robert E. Lee somewhere that I got with a collection of books. I never read it, but it's quite thick. He was apparently quite good. I mean, I suppose it's something that you shouldn't be good at, but I certainly gave them a run for their money, but he loses in the end. For all the first week of June, they waited. For all of the second week of June, they waited. For all the third week of June, they waited. Hey, I thought this was a summer of slaughter. I'm just looking at this guy. You think he looks like Terry with a beard or a mustache? That was the style of stash back then. Mustache styles change over time, I suppose. Particularly unfortunate one from the 1930s. Okay. The Irish were joined by a regiment of New England Yankees, the 29th Massachusetts on orders. The soldiers had Union blue in common, but little else. The Micks were clannish. The Bay Staters complained, a tribe unto themselves. It was hard to understand what the hell they were saying. In battle, they shouted out a name unknown to most American soldiers, to Fontenoy, commemorating the French defeat of the English in 1745. With considerable help from Erin's armed exiles, Fontenoy, the brigade was a class of Irish exquisites, one reporter wrote of the culture clash. Quite good for a fight, card party, or hurdle jumping, but extremely too quixotic for the sober requirement of Yankee warfare. As a welcoming gesture, Marr gave the 29th a green flag. It was furled and packed away by an officer who was indignant at having to take orders from an Irish revolutionary. To break the tedium of June, the Irish had picket duty guarding the rear outside Richmond, rounding up the occasional straggler and deserter. They could set their watches to the chimes of the capital city's clocks, could overhear conversations of the Southerners, drawled out bits of demoralized talk. At times, they were fired upon and shelled. The pinpricks were annoying and fed the desire for a full invasion. Let's take Richmond, the men told each other. Get it and over with. What did McClellan want? He never seizes his opportunities, Lincoln complained to his advisors. That's where the trouble is. The rain slackened, roads hardened in the summer sun. The fighting stopped, but the dying continued. On a quiet day, Marr visited the field hospital, a laboratory of gore on the medical frontier. It was a swamp of moaning and thirsty men crying for relief from the saline slop of blood in the mouth. He was overwhelmed by the damage that industrial age warfare could inflict on a body. Better to die quick than to fester in agony. Severed legs, feet, and arms piled up in corners to be carted away in wheelbarrows and then fed to pigs. Oh my God. What an image. Pigs will eat almost anything. That's why people worry about eating pigs, because people can throw like literally things in bags of plastic and the pigs will eat it, because they're hungry and they're pigs. There's a saying about pigs and shit being happy, but really, I mean, they're they're happy little guys. I don't know. I mean, some of them can be big and nasty. You don't really want to fight a pig, but you know, They don't have high standards. I'll put it that way. They'll eat your decapitated arm. Uh, Men lost their eyes, their teeth, their noses, and their cheeks hollowed, their collarbones shattered, their fingers clipped off, their skulls cracked by fast flying lead balls and shell fragments. Infection was the biggest killer. Oh, I'm sure. Wounds turned red in triage, white with pus, attracted maggots. Doctors with blood up to their elbows tried to carve out balls from muscles, a last measure before administering a dose of chloroform and taking to the saw. And now this. In the heat of the first week of summer, at their camp near the mush of the Chickahominy, thousands of soldiers came down with malaria. The shaking and chills, the spiked temperatures and profuse sweating, the vomiting, the intense headaches. It was as if the fever of the famine had followed the Irish to Virginia. The disease took hundreds of men. Funerals happened almost hourly, bodies buried to a band's mournful tune, guns emptied and reversed, placed over the graves. The commanders did everything in their power to keep the premises clean, but sick horses dropped and swelled at such a rate that the brigade could not keep up. At one point, the men burned the dead animals, more than 400 in a massive fire. To quell the malaria, the Surgeon General of the Army ordered each soldier to take a dose of quinine mixed with a small amount of whiskey every morning. On June 25th, as the great battle that all had anticipated got underway, except a surprise. It was not McClellan moving to conquer Richmond, but the rebels on the offensive. Robert E. Lee would now try to drive the Northerners from the Virginia Peninsula to destroy them with the largest Confederate attack of the year-old war. Lee had mapped a campaign to pummel troops north of the river using Stonewall Jackson, who had come down from the Shenandoah as his hammer, assisted by other divisions. Lee sent more than 50,000 men against a much smaller force that had been lazing through the month of June. Rising from the early summer stupor, General Fitz John Porter's 35,000 soldiers tried to block the gray shirted masses. Staggered, they fell back to Gaines's mill, took a position on a rise, and threw together a wall of rocks and wood, allowing them to fight from the protected high ground. On June 27th, Stonewall Jackson poured it on, confident as always that God was on the side of the slaveholders. This affair must hang in suspense no more, said Jackson. Sweep the field with the bayonet. Brigades from Georgia, Texas, Alabama, North Carolina, and a reckless unit out of Louisiana, the Tiger Rifles, rushed to overwhelm the Union men. Their pace forward was brisk, 50, 40, 20 yards from Porter's line, closing fast. Now the rebels broke through, crushing skulls and piercing chests. Porter's men fell back, regrouping into another position. Not all stayed in place. Hundreds of men scooted down the other side of the hill toward the Chickahominy, their backs to the enemy. The Union command turned to Mars Irish, where they were they ready to fight again. It was an order posed as a question. In double time, the brigade hurried 5 miles to bolster Porter's battered forces. Once more, the immigrants waded and dragged horses and caissons across the bloated river, and once more they steeled themselves for a close range struggle to snuff other men's hearts. They were loaded with buck and ball, their bayonets fixed, Mar on his horse with his sword unsheathed. The sight that greeted them on the other side of the river was pitiful. Union soldiers stumbling in retreat, crying out, "We've been cut to pieces." Mar's men made it up the hill, where most of Porter's soldiers had congregated. As the last of the light was bleeding from the sky, battle smoke holding a blush of sunset red, nothing more was seen or heard of the enemy throughout the night. Marr wrote in his official report, what made him proudest was that he'd stemmed a Union collapse without firing a shot. The mere presence of fresh troops had forced a rebel withdrawal. A witness, Union Army Captain W.F. Lyons, remembered the scene at dusk. Marr's brigade stood, panting and elated, between the army they had saved and the enemy they had vanquished. The first day of the 7 days' battles had cost Lee 8,500 men to nearly 7,000 for Porter. Despite taking higher casualties than the North, Lee had shaken Union confidence. There would be no march on the Confederate capital. We sleep in the field and shall renew the contest in the morning, Lee reported by dispatch. Before dawn, the Union soldiers left the rise and crossed back over the Chickahominy on McClellan's orders, a tide of wounded and combat-shattered men. The general said it wasn't a retreat, but a repositioning. The soldiers knew otherwise. Instead of going one way toward Richmond, the Army of the Potomac would go in another, to the James River. Tents, trunks, cots, wagons, much food and bedding, all were left behind in the big move. Field hospitals were collapsed, with many of the wounded still in place. Backpedaling soldiers passed black faces in and out of hiding. In this large slave-holding state in America, officially slaves were now classified as contraband if taken by the Union. But the North didn't want the burden. Little Mac's retreat emboldened Lee, whose new plan was cut off. The Union supply lines and crushed them before they could fall under the protection of gunboats in the James River. The nasty task of defending the rear under incessant shelling and sniper fire was given to the Irish. They were the last to cross the Chickahominy and the last out of the month-old camp, burning caches of supplies as they went. In the midday heat, soldiers flung off their uniforms, got seared and dehydrated, and fell with sunstroke behind the road. For 2 days, marching behind cattle and a mobile hospital, the Irish had nothing to eat. They were under constant attack, scuffling and brawling their way forward. Both armies were hemorrhaging men to desertion and enemy capture. In haste, the bluecoats dug shallow mass graves for their dead, sweeping some who were still breathing into the ground by accident. Many not yet dead were buried alive. Father Corby wrote, as we have reason to know from some who revived enough to protest just as they were about to be placed in the pit. At night, the skies unloaded a steady rain, making sleep impossible. On June 30, as the Union Army passed through the sludge of White Oak Swamp, heavy shelling signaled a fresh rebel assault. 20,000 Confederates jumped the Federals. Exhausted, hungry, suffering from the heat, Marr's men were held back until evening. At 6 p.m., they were ordered into combat. Boys, you go in to save another day, the general said General Sumner. They fought until nightfall, when guns from both sides ceased fire. The North used the cover of darkness to continue the retreat, walking until well past midnight. There was enough moonlight for Marr's men to catch glimpses of the Confederates stripping the left behind Union dead of their clothes and shoes. Near the James River, McClellan's army now took up a position on Malvern Hill, 150 feet above the plain, cut by a pair of ravines on either side, a perch that would be hard to capture. Near the base of the hill, just as they were pulling mud-caked bedrolls over tired bodies, the Irish were roused by an attack from the Louisiana Tiger Rifles. No unit from the South was more feared than the Tigers. A regiment of thieves, wharf rats, convicts, and roustabouts from New Orleans, the southern equivalent of the Bowery Boys from 5 Points. They were Irish, nominally Catholic, and famine refugees, brothers in snarl and attitude, in culture and faith, in every way but for the fact that one side wore blue and the other gray. They had been a tiger who killed Haggerty at Bull Run. Mar's men had no time to grab muskets or fix bayonets. The brawl in the dark was all fists and knives, biting and head-butting, Irish on Irish, spying a rebel officer on horseback who seemed to be taking in the fight for his amusement. A New Yorker grabbed him by the pant legs. Come out of there, you spalpeen. The word, born in Ireland, had only one meaning. He threw the officer to the ground and later presented him as a prize prisoner. The fight ended with neither side claiming victory. All right, now I need to take a little break and Google what spalpeen means. I'm sorry, but it's not in my American lexicon over here. A rascal. Why don't you just say rascal? Why can't you just say that? Rascal, such an underutilized word, don't you think? Mm, mm. At dawn on July 1st, Lee tried to take Malvern Hill. It was all that stood between his army and McClellan's new base at the James River on Harrison's Landing. He had the momentum, he felt, having captured 6,000 Union soldiers during the bedraggled pullback, but he was losing his own men at an alarming rate, more than 15,000 since he took command. Lee ordered artillery to be hauled up nearby hills, giving him, he hoped, enough height and range to reach Malvern. Marr had not slept. After the skirmish with the Tigers, he was primed and jittery with adrenaline. He stayed up for the remainder of the night drinking black coffee with two generals, Richardson, who had been his guest at the horse races a long month ago, and Sumner, the old bull. He told his superiors that his men would fight again if they had to, but they were worn to the bone. For 5 days they had gone without food and had very little rest. Their faces were smudged with powder, dirt, and blood. Every day had been a skirmish or a battle. Marr had lost many friends. The generals told him that they would try to hold the Irish out if they could. As Lee's shells, canisters of shot, and 10-pound balls reached for Malvern Hill, Marr's men killed a few more stray sheep and built a big fire. They would feast on mutton while the last of the 7 days' battles raged to one side of them. The Union, it was now clear, had the high ground advantage. Lee would have to do more than lob lead uphill. The Irish never got to taste the lamb. The brigade was needed on another side of Malvern Hill, where Lee had ordered a desperation infantry attack. Marr donned his green plumed cap, mounted his horse, raised his sword, and led 4 hungry regiments back into combat. It would be safer for him to remain on foot, less of a target, he was advised. Not a chance. Marr would stay in the saddle and take the odds. He ordered his men to strip off their uniform tops, the better to kill in shirt sleeves or bare chested. Marr felt the sharp whistle of a ball passing within a quarter inch of his temple, shredding his calf. Another bullet grazed his hand. He led 3 charges, aided by artillery from above him. Again, the muskets failed them, becoming overheated and useless. Marr needed time for the weapons to cool before he could charge again, but high ground won the day. For the first time in the Civil War, more soldiers were killed by artillery fire than by gunshot. The rebel dead formed clumps on the ground, mounds of bodies cut down by bombardment. For every one Union soldier who fell on Malvern Hill, nearly three Confederates died. When the guns quieted around 9 p.m., the hill was still in Union hands. McClellan's army is saved, Captain Conyngham observed, but that hillside is covered with the dead and dying of the Irish brigade. He watched one man find the body of his brother, prop it up, and try to speak to him. The soldier spent the night lying next to the lifeless sibling. In the morning, he built a coffin from boards of an old house nearby and lowered his brother into the ground. Lee had lost 20,000 men, almost one fourth of his army. In the Peninsula battles, Union casualties were more than half of that. But McClellan, in his timidity, had given the South new life. The slaveholding republic that had been his to take a month earlier had driven him away from Richmond. It was left to the Irish and all their fellow foot soldiers to wonder why they were now bivouacked on the James River instead of parading down the wide main boulevard of Richmond. Mark grappled with the rationales of war, his conscience sometimes getting the better of him when his pride didn't. He showed Bull Sumner the bullet riddled banner of his regiments. This is a holy flag, General, but he wept at the price. The Irish brigade had been cut down by nearly a third. The 69th alone had gone from 750 men to 295 in a week's time. His friend Kavanagh from Young Ireland was still alive, a small condolence. Lieutenant Temple Emmett, another man who had Aaron's struggle in his veins, was sick with what appeared to be malaria. Mar's closest aide, young Emmett, lay on his back in the summer heat, hallucinating with fever. The boy was a grandnephew of Robert Emmett, whose words on the eve of his execution by the English in 1803 were known in all parts of the globe where the Irish had been scattered. Let no man write my epitaph. When my country takes her place among the nations of the earth, then and not till then let my epitaph be written. In the ebb between episodes of butchery, what does epitaph mean though? I have a vague idea, but I'm not certain. Between episodes of butchery, Marr fought his doubts. What had become of Captain John Donovan, last reported to have taken a bullet through the eye? All the good men he led into combat. O'Donohoe dead, Haggerty, who lost a brother at Bull Run, dead, Rafferty, a private just turned 17, his jaw shattered, 2 bullets in the mouth, left behind in the rain, captured or killed. Captain Egan, badly wounded. Same for Lieutenants Carr, Burns, and Maroney. And think of his countrymen on the other side, the Tigers of Louisiana. Why were Irish fighting Irish in the New World instead of turning guns as one against the crown in Dublin? Why? Well, to show that they were worthy Americans, and indeed a just issued Currier and Ives' lithograph of the Irish Brigade at Fair Oaks had made national heroes of Marr and his immigrant warriors. That fame would do nothing for Ireland. The larger goal, as before, was to free their old country. Just keep saying it to yourself and your men. Never forget what the dying is for. But in truth, how could these sickly and broken boned boys force the British Empire to give up control of Ireland? Better to think of something else, to think of his wife and how war sharpened the senses for love. Marr begged to go home. McClellan agreed to grant him a short leave of absence, but not for the purpose of seeing Libby. He would let him go to rustle up fresh recruits. We want many more wild Irish men, McClellan said later. Fine, but one more request. Marr asked to take Temple Emmett. The Patriots descended with him to get medical attention. Permission granted. In the second week of July, they left for New York on a mission to probe what was left of the Irish will to fight a war that had become theirs by blood. Chapter 16, Reasons to Live and Die. Wow, what a title. With Libby at her father's home in Manhattan, Marr could be a husband again for a few New York nights. Having and holding, their love making had yet to produce a child. Perhaps it was not to be, but his proximity to sudden death had brought them closer. He could let down his general's armor, tell her of the bullets that whistled by him, of how the clear eyed young who had paraded down Broadway behind a green flag had been left in a Chickahominy swamp. A Irishmen in their prime, forever in that fetid hole. He could describe a lead ball going through Donovan's eye and exiting his ear, or Emmett shivering and sweating on the way home. The letters he had to write to parents of dead children who had decided to follow him to war, he could tell her because he told her everything, as he'd promised in 1855. No secrets. She said New York had changed. If you haven't noticed, the Copperheads, those venomous Democrats who wanted to negotiate an immediate settlement, were ascendant. Perhaps it was true what they said. Lincoln was not up to the task of repairing a national crack up. Maybe they were right that the North could never win, not so long as the South threw men like the Tiger rifles on at federal forces. In the slums of the Lower East Side, on the docks, and in the pubs, the loudest voices came from those fired with suspicion and hate. The Irish were killing people they had no reason to kill, it was said, and dying for people who knew nothing of their struggles. The only reason to enlist in Lincoln's army was mercenary. Just outside the recruiting station, the papers made a big deal of men in top hats paying Irish laborers to join up there and then. Here, lad, here's $20 to sign for 3 years. The Union needed arms bearing flesh. Who better than the Irish? If so, why not wait for a better price? A draft was coming. Everybody knew it. In July, Congress had passed a militia law requiring each state to fill a quota of soldiers. You could see where this was going. Word on the street was that a couple $100 would buy your way out of service, purchasing another man to take your place. This on top of a bounty from the state and federal governments of up to $160 and $13 a month in soldiers' wages. For the Irish, it would be more profitable to sell yourself to a rich man, let him dodge conscription for a price, and collect all the incentive cash than to give up a healthy body on the cheap. Pillow talk stayed with the husband and wife. Such candor could not leave home. In public, Marr was the doubtless face of the Irish Brigade, a sheen of honor and valor, armor back in place. Fresh words rolled out again to serve the Union. On the evening of July 25th, he made his way through a sweaty crowd, packed into the armory of New York's 7th Regiment. His task was to fortify the case for a war that was not going well. The draft talk did not help. In Irish neighborhoods of East Coast cities, protests had broken out. Some of the marchers carrying a bannered proclamation, "We won't fight to free the blank horrible word." 10,000 people showed up to hear Marr speak. Half of them were turned away. The brigade had come in for a run of good press, even if the war had not. And Marr was an idol. At Fair Oaks, at Gaines Mill, at Malvern Hill, in each battle, the reputation of Irish warriors and their eccentric flair was enhanced. The New York Times had praised the noble sons of Erin who have so fearlessly thrown their lives into the breach to defend the land of the free from its traitorous assailants. The New York Herald wrote that the brogue of every country from down to Wexford fell upon the ear. After the Battle of Fair Oaks, when anything absurd, forlorn, or desperate was to be attempted, the Irish Brigade was called upon. But ordinarily, they were regarded as a party of mad fellows. McClellan had lionized them, as had the Confederate brass. Grudgingly, General Sumner would not think of going to battle without them. Abraham Lincoln himself, meeting with Union generals at Harrison's Landing a week after Malvern Hill, was seen grasping the banner of the 69th. God bless the Irish flag, he said. So reported a Union officer. What's more, he said the president had kissed that green flag. No king of England, no prime minister would ever do that. And yet, this story could not be repeated tonight in New York. It would only stoke jeers that the immigrants were fighting Lincoln's war. Before Marr could speak, music set the mood. Several thousand voices rose to mouth the words of the exile of Erin, their song to a man and woman. Sad is my fate, and the heart-broken stranger. The wild deer and wolf to a covert can flee, but I have no refuge from famine and danger. A home and a country remain not to me. Marr was there to convince the mass of exiles that a home and a country were here for them now, even if they were just warm bodies to throw at Southern bodies, musket holders and cannon loaders. Still, something momentous, dare he say historic, was happening to the immigrants fighting another country's mortal conflict. The boys from Dublin and Drogheda, from thousands of villages beginning with the Gaelic word bally, were becoming Americans, no different than boys from Indiana and New Hampshire. War made them belong. It is a favorite thought of ours, contemplating the majesty and grandeur of the Republic, that the foundations upon which they rest have been cemented by the blood and brains of so many Celts from Ireland. A soldier in the brigade wrote his hometown newspaper. Marr had seen the transformation as further incentive. Lincoln had signed the Homestead Act, opening the West for settlement by people who could never fathom owning a large tract of land. Beginning January 1st, 1863, for a $6 filing fee and a year's residency, the plot of ground, a veteran of 2 years in the Union Army could become lord and master of 160 acres, the size of an estate in Ireland. The police ordered all windows opened in the stifling armory. When Marr appeared, he was mobbed. The crowd would not let him move. In his general's uniform, gold on blue, he looked as if he'd sprung from an oil portrait in a castle. Like one of the old Irish princes from medieval times, one spectator recalled. More music. Gary Owen, the song that accompanied the Irish Brigade in formation and announced their presence in battle, filled the hall. Despite its Anglicanized name, the song was birthed outside Limerick in a drinking ballad, like the best music to emerge from Gaelic cellars. It was part defiance against authority, part battle cry. We'll beat the bailiffs out of fun. We'll make the mayor and sheriffs run. We are the boys no man dares done. From songs to cheers, from cheers to a chant as they call his name in the Patriot Speak. Notable for his absence tonight was Archbishop John Hughes. 14 months earlier, he'd blessed the Irish Brigade at a mass at St. Patrick's and a parade down Broadway. 7 years earlier, he'd opened his mansion to Thomas and Elizabeth at their wedding, sealing the Marr vows. But Dagger John was not happy with the horrific number of Irish deaths. Surely the casualty rate was higher for them than for other Union troops, even if not by design. It was too much sacrifice, and the latest rumors from Washington, a military draft on the way, yes, but worse than that, word that Lincoln might free the slaves, made a dyspeptic cleric clutch his stomach. He'd issued a declaration embossed with imprimatur of the archdiocese aimed at Lincoln. It was read in parishes throughout New York. We Catholics and a vast majority of our troops in the field have not the slightest idea of carrying on a war that cost so much blood and treasure to justify a clique of abolitionists in the North. So there it was from on high. Without filter or equivocation, the Irish would not fight to liberate enslaved blacks. God himself may well have spoken, line drawn. In his defense, the Archbishop had the support of the Irish American press. What Marr did not know was he bounded to the stage on the night of July 25th. What nobody in the armory could know was that 3 days earlier, Lincoln had drafted a proclamation that would eventually free 4 million people from their chains, at least on paper. The president showed an early version of the Emancipation Decree in his cabinet. Most of his aides were stirred, but a few cautious voices emerged, parsing the politics of something so consequential. Better to wait for a Union triumph on the battlefield, a knockout to cheer the North, and then let the slavery freeing edict ride on the breeze of victory. On the other hand, what of England? This was the great diplomatic balancing act, its outcome equal in impact to any loss on a battlefield. Lincoln had returned those two Confederate diplomats seized from a British ship, one war at a time, he said, but Britain appeared closer to recognizing the South than ever before. If Lincoln broke the manacles that held millions to their masters in the American South, the war would be explicitly without a great moral cause. This would force the issue. Would England recognize the largest, perhaps the last, of the Western nations to defend slavery? Surely not. For now, the president set aside his draft. On stage, Marr sweated through his dress blues. He had dreadful news to impart, the latest casualties. Everyone in the room knew someone on the list. Solemnity was not Marr's strong suit, but he proceeded. The regiments of the Irish Brigade were decimated, he explained, some of them barely functioning. He needed 2,000 men to sign on for 3 years. To this, no applause. Only a few insults from hecklers. You're a fool. He unfolded a letter from Captain Donovan on the 69th, a prisoner in Richmond later exchanged. Now recovering in a New York hospital, lost one eye, he did. Told his captors that even with half his vision, he would fight them, and if he lost that other eye, he would fight blind. With this, Marr got a laugh and a big cheers. Damn right, don't mess with a blind Irishman. Donovan said that the rebels who interrogated him in Richmond had little fear of Union soldiers, except whereabouts, or except for the Irish. His captors told him that if they knew of the brigade's precise whereabouts during the Peninsula campaign, they would have sent a whole division to take it and General Marr prisoners and hang the exiled traitor from the highest tree in Richmond. Another government wanted to hang Thomas Francis Marr. Imagine that. The story produced a hearty rumble of claps. The Irish loved being told they were fearless bastards, crazy and unpredictable, and Marr loved being called reckless, half mad, a life of improbable invulnerability, riding along on a white horse. Let him talk down south. After the applause subsided, Marr returned to the need for soldiers. He was interrupted by a shout from the floor. Take the black Republicans. What's that? Why don't you make the black Republicans go? Red-faced, Marr turned on the heckler who had used the derisive term for a Lincoln supporter. Any man who makes a remark like that I denounce as a poltroon and a coward. The dissident was escorted out, Playing again to Gaelic pride, Marr told a pair of anecdotes about his brigade's banner, General Sumner almost begging when he asked, "Where are my green flags?" And the enemy, they knew about the North's Irish warriors throughout the slave states. He quoted a Mississippi regimental leader, fear on his face, when Marr's men charged. "Here's that damn green flag again." That line nearly brought down the armory. Even the cops laughed. But he still had to fill the empty ranks in Lincoln's army. Marr reached for his climax. "Come, my countrymen, fling yourselves a generous passion into the armed lines. Come, my countrymen, one more effort, magnanimous and chivalrous, for a republic which to hundreds of thousands of you has been a shelter, a home. Come, my countrymen, follow me to James River." In the end, the orator's words were not enough. By the close, yeah, I mean, I'm sorry, but that's not how you get people to join a war. You conscript them or you offer them money. That's why most wars now are fought by the poorest. Okay. Mhm. Filling up their exhausted ranks, in the end, the order's words were not enough. By the close of Mar's leave, only 250 new men had signed for duty, filling up the exhausted ranks of the Irish Brigade. Mar wrote in a blunt letter to President Lincoln on the last day of July, "To tell the truth, an uphill work to reconstitute itself. Mar's unit would need new soldiers from other parts of the North." August delivered a fresh blow, the death of Temple Emmett from typhoid fever. Marr was beside himself at the loss of a young man who had shadowed his every move in the peninsula. His aide de camp, having lobbied General McClellan to bring Emmett home, having taken personal responsibility for the lad, he thought he had saved him from the plagues of war. "I am grieved to the heart to hear this," Marr wrote a friend, "for I esteemed, trusted, and loved him to a favorite brother." He said nothing of the cause for which Emmett had given his life. Oh, thank you, Jerry. All right. We'll pick it up there on Sunday because today is Thursday, if you can believe it. Congratulations, Freddie. Okay. I wanted to show you that there's a picture of him in here, and it's also on the cover. But there he is. There's Thomas Marr in his Union uniform. Those old photos are always a bit creepy and haunted looking, but there you go. So I have food. I went grocery shopping, so I know I have something to make up fresh tonight. Um, Mostly I bought a lot of fruits. Um, I really wish I went yesterday. It keeps bothering me. Like, what did I miss yesterday? I feel like Wednesday's a better day, but I couldn't do it, so whatever. Don't dwell on unimportant things, Stella. What else? Yeah, so tonight I'm going to be packing up those orders. Maybe tomorrow I'll be bringing them out. Also, I finished watching that Black Bag movie last night. I was like, you know what? I should finish something. And there's only like 20 minutes left, and I finished it, and I didn't understand it. And I don't understand the ending or anything that happened, but visually it was on the television, and I was sort of trying to watch it. So, yeah, I did watch that. I don't think of anything else, but if you have any recommendations, you can always shoot it into my inbox. I see you tomorrow. I love you so much. Good night.